Hi, folks. My name is Despiona, and I am Ash, as well as you may now know, the Queen. Call me D. That's my
Oh,
pronoun. I was like, oh, pronouns?
Yeah, I'm Dimitrios. Pronouns are he, him. I composed the musical score for The Butterfly Queen.
my name is Cass, pronounced she, her. I was the sound recordist, and also at times the monster.
Although Ash and the Queen are representative of the same person, they present themselves differently in their mannerisms and in their personality. At the end of the film, how do you imagine their combined character like balancing the multitudes that they hold?
Mm. Well, I think when I think of balance in terms of River at the end of the film, I think of therapy. I think of HRT. I think of hormones.
Hmm.
I think of like this person has gone through a lot and is at a stage where they have figured out a lot, but were in turmoil really for the time prior to the film and throughout it. So coming on the other side, as this kind of like blend of who Ash was and who the Queen was, like I'm thinking like materially, like what is this person doing to nurture the person that they are now? Like it's all to me based in healing. That's why I kind of like that, it's and the next step is whatever River decides the next step needs to be. Like that's kind of how the ending goes because yeah.
Film scores are not composed until a film is fully edited. How many weeks did you have to work between receiving the edited film and the actual release of the final cut?
It's a good question. If I remember correctly, it was somewhere between 6 and 8.
Mm,
Like the I think the first screening was just over 8 weeks from when I got what we call picture lock. So when the
mm,
final edit is set, and there aren't going to be any changes to like timing or frames or anything like that. Yeah, I had about 8 weeks. I don't compose as my full-time job,
mm.
so 8 weeks sounds like a lot, but when you're writing, I think it was like over 40 minutes of music. Um, it's a lot, and most of it is not. I'm not good enough to just throw something at it and have it always get the green light the first time. So it's a lot of rewriting and
Mm.
going over things with Liam and whoever might be on the creative team for that particular project. But yeah, 8 weeks, it felt really good. I didn't feel strapped for anything other than just making sure everything sounded really good.
So as sound recordists, you sometimes get to hear the literal heartbeats of the actors as much as like, anything else, right?
Yes.
And so what sound affected you the most from set?
The thing about lavalier mics is they're very sensitive, which of course is, fantastic and important and essential for their function, and picking up that crisp dialogue, and especially like the main sort of difference between like the audio you're getting from a boom microphone and the audio you're getting from a lavalier is you're really getting like that timbre of a person's voice because you're getting the vibration around the chest area, but also because of that, you don't always have the luxury of having the exact right fabric that isn't going to, cause issues. So, I think that was a big one. Also, I remember a specific creative time where Sophie's necklace it was like a crystal necklace. It was like a crystal little quartz necklace, and her top was like this mesh top, and so it kind of in the way that it had like there was a gap, and the
Hmm.
the necklace would bounce because it's such like a it's like a stretchy material. It's almost like you know, like if you like stretched it over like a bucket, and then you like
Mm.
dropped a ball on top of that bucket with this fabric of the shirt, if this is making any sense, it would bounce. And
Hmm.
so that was the same thing happening with the necklace, and it would just go, you know, she was walking or doing whatever, and the necklace would bounce and make this very fun little sound if we were, you know, if we were trying to get like a bouncing sound, the occasional rooster. Um,
I was waiting for you to say that.
yeah. Yeah, it was really like the actors and then the roosters. They were just as much a part of the cast.
When responding to Luca's death, Ash and the Queen go to great lengths to kind of control their emotional reaction, and they even create this whole mental escape using magic. How does their story translate to real people handling difficult situations in real life?
You know, it's funny because I was not necessarily, it's baked into the script and I wasn't thinking about this so specifically, beyond it just being a reality of what happens in the story. But somebody recently, I saw someone articulate that like there is this way sometimes where when a trauma happens to you, a part of you does not advance beyond the age at which that moment occurred, right? Um, and that's obviously what's so clearly the case for what's going on in terms of the whole Butterfly Junction situation. I mean, like, technically speaking, like Ash gets to get away with, like, River gets to get away with a little bit of time travel in the end of all of this because, like, there were just some off-screen years happening in a magical time, like, place and space. But
A few
yeah,
decades, nothing major.
it's like it's fine. Just like skip a couple decades. It's all good. But yeah, like I think that there is something to how deeply affecting traumatic experiences are on just the human psyche in general. And it's interesting too because through the kind of immediate like splitting off of these different impulses from this like singular person and the creation of the queen, from Ash, like you also have this like there is this person who manifests to protect this other person, but then there's also like there's this entity that manifests to protect this other entity, but also like these are two different responses to the same thing, you know. And so there is the queen embodying one emotional response, which is to like press this thing down and move forward and do what needs to be done in the particular moment. And then there is Ash moving from this emotional response of like absolute just like horror and devastation and like just dripping tears and like barely holding themselves together. And so that also kind of shows the, you know, not just the depth, but the breadth of like the range of emotion that occurs in the specific moment that a trauma happens.
An orchestra was not employed under your direction. So without that, how did you accomplish the full and sort of like complex score with the diversity of all the instruments just on your own?
So there's the conceptual part of that, and then there's the literal like sounds that you hear. As far as the actual sounds, I use something called MIDI, which so in my software, I have a whole bunch of, they're basically sampled instruments. Some of them, you know, of various different orchestras that have been recorded. And basically it's a whole library of sounds where you can kind of access what an orchestra would sound like. So everything from string instruments all the way to brass and anything in between, pianos, and all different articulations, different dynamics, and that kind of thing. So a lot of it is, you know, once I've decided that I want to use something like that, there's a fair amount of strings in the score. the pianos that I record, I play it, but they're not live, full-bodied grand pianos, as much as I would love to have one of those in my studio. So that's sort of like the technical, literal side of like, how am I hearing strings and other orchestral instruments in this score if there wasn't an orchestra to record it. And a lot of that is getting them to sound as realistic as possible. It's just feeling out the dynamics and knowing kind of where I want ebbs and flows and things to be. Conceptually, a lot of that was just sort of, those are decisions that I made based on what I was seeing and what I was inspired by, and also what Liam knew he wanted for the sound. So we didn't want a big, like, bombastic, full-scale orchestral score. That just wasn't right for the film, but we knew that there would be moments and parts of it that were appropriate for some of that stuff. So there's a few sections with like solo string instruments that are kind of carrying important parts, and we talked a lot about that. So a lot of it is just knowing those instruments pretty well, having composed for real players in the past, and then just pulling what sounds I have at my disposal and just making them sound really good. It would be a lot easier if I could just write the notes on a page and hand them to somebody who does that for a living. That would be, that's the dream. But you work with what the scope of the project is. So
the characters in the film move location between every scene, and what determines your recording and mixing plans for each new space?
Yeah, man, that is essentially the question. On a smaller scope project like this, you don't always have the luxury of having been to every space, beforehand, especially, the bulk of what we shot was actually outdoors. And so, you'd think that would be mostly, one plan, one approach, but you're going to get a different sound space, and whether we were in, deeper forest, or we were in a bog, which we were.
We were in a bog.
So if we're like on a playground. So, it first just sort of starts with, are we in an interior space? Are we in an exterior space? And what are the surroundings? Are we having trees? Is there going to be like rustling of leaves? Will we, that sort of thing. And that usually comes down to, what are we doing? What is the tracking of the boom mic? Are we going to have to, turn it away from the floor when they're walking on the crusty leaves? Probably. But that was a big thing on this project for sure. And I think it was almost trickier to work with the interior spaces most of the time, just because of the interior spaces that we did have, which included, something like a barn area with a really thin tin roof, and also a space that's very echoey. We shot in a gym, where we got that classic squeaky floor and the classic, kind of like whisper echo, which is all well and good, and they're nice sounds. But if you can't isolate, certain things, if you can't take out the echo and you can't take out the squeak, then that's where it becomes a little bit of a troubleshooting thing. And especially on an independent project, like, it really came down to obviously doing as much prep as we could, and then troubleshooting the day of with different spaces.
The one day that I actually got to visit set, I forget which scene it was, but it was a really intimate scene in the barn, and it just started downpouring, and there was like a whole 45-minute conversation about what do we do about the audio for this scene.
Yeah.
I can imagine you make really good friends with your EQ throughout this whole process.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a really fun day. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Like if we wanted like a really crisp, like rain on a tin roof sound, oh my God, like
You would have
heaven,
had it.
you know what I mean? But unfortunately, the specifics of that one, especially was like, the idea of, well, it could be raining, but then, you bring to the fact like this is a fantasy realm, and that was another thing that I played into, just like kind of thinking about the sound spaces in the different scenes and the different locations, because there were scenes where we were in the real world as we know it, and there are scenes where we're in Butterfly Junction, and how are the sounds going to differ. That especially came to a point, to a head in the that scene in the barn when it started raining, and we're like, okay, how could we work this in at all? Could this make sense at all in the space? We had to consider the fact that this is in Butterfly Junction. Does it rain in Butterfly Junction? Because we did, at a point, after a certain point, just because of how the summer shoot went, like they sort of established um, the town in the real world as sort of this space where it was always raining. And
Mhm.
so we kind of wanted that distinction, between the real world town and Butterfly Junction. So rain in Butterfly Junction was almost went against that sort of theme that we've been building, or Liam and Shauna ended up conceptualizing later on.
You wore 4 different full body costumes over the course of the film, one of which was the Queen's, of course. How does that level of elaborate costuming affect your day to day on set and being on screen?
It makes my job so much easier. Just because like I'm a very like body leads the rest type of like approach when it comes to my like performance. And so as an actor, I have to do less work thinking about like how does this person move and how does that influence how they speak, because that was always what I was focused on the most when I was really any of these characters, because I was so many different characters, they all needed to vocally sound different or distinct enough that like it doesn't play super early that like, oh, this is the same person, like this is all just this person. And so for me, I don't have to imagine anymore. Like it takes some of the imaginative work out of my hands when I'm like placed into a costume that feels completely different from the costume that I was in a different day. So it's like the way that I can see out of the eyes of the skull half mask in the Queen, which like made me emphasize the use of my eyes when wearing it versus like not being able to see literally a lick of me in the Portalista, and so kind of having to like make everything, and also it being like this almost like snuffleupagus, like very like floppy fun, like I had to make everything very like to make the costume move, because the motions of my like joints were one thing, but the motions of the costume sell a certain like attitude about who this character is. And so it's like, yeah, like it just helped me make a lot of my choices even more specific, both physically and vocally. And that was just appreciated on all fronts. But we did have an amazing hair, makeup, and costume scene. So
Scenes have rhythm, but do not run on metronomes. So when mixing for film, how do you approach timing and tone setting when building tracks for emotional scenes?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So there's 2 sides of it. One is something that is called tempo mapping, which
Mm.
I mean, like big composers that work on like huge Hollywood films get really elaborate with this, where like down to the frame, they know if they have a tempo change, they know exactly when it's changing. They know like the BPM that's shifting, like how gradual that change is, all that stuff. I did not get that intricate with my tempo mapping for the Butterfly Queen. But one of the reasons for that is I was given a really wonderful gift, which is that the filmmakers, like the entire team that worked on this and all the editing was just done in a really like rhythmically natural way. I cannot think of any scenes where I felt like I'm not getting the timing. Like I can't fit musically what I'm coming up with into like the cuts or whatever. Like there was none of that. I was given a really just sort of a perfect canvas for setting tempo and rhythm onto. As far as the emotional scenes, yeah, those are trickier. A lot of it boils down to picking out specific sort of emotional beats. And a lot of this is done with the notes that I get from a director as far as what when they want to shift in the tonality, when they want to start emphasizing a different feel. Like Liam was pretty specific with a lot of this stuff, but he didn't lead me in how he wanted that to happen, just identifying that there should be a change here. So usually it's identifying those moments and then making sure that the musical material lends itself well to those shifts and changes. Usually, I think for the emotional scenes, I had a lot of I had an easy time working with so much of the edit because the performances were so strong, and I just felt like it was already sort of giving me a tempo and a pacing that I could almost improv over some of those scenes, even the more like emotional and intimate ones, and I had the tempo was just already there on screen. I just had to kind of realize it musically. For me, the fast-paced stuff, like the action stuff, is actually harder because I have to
Oh,
be more
wow.
strict, rigid with like
Ah.
this change needs to be like tight to whatever cut or like specific hits, that kind of thing. That's tougher for me than just kind of feeling the pace of a scene and being able to improv or like pseudo improv over something and then build the piece against that. So
Right.
every different, but those are tougher for me, I think.
So you might remember a time in which the monster was recast during filming and the costume only fit one particular person. You yourself. What did it feel like to be inside the costume, and how was sound recorded when you were on screen?
You know, when you feel like you finally kind of like reached your final form. That's what it felt like, you know what I mean? It felt like slipping on like my real skin. No. I gotta say that was the most exciting day, one of the most exciting days of my life. I was like, if I was like, "Ah, man, if 5 years ago I could have told myself I would have been offered this like elaborate monster costume and just been like, just be a monster, I'd have been like, no, no, that's not gonna happen. But I was happy. I was so happy. It was very, I think Ezra, my boom operator, was maybe not as, ecstatic just because I was basically like, okay, I'm gonna slip into this monster costume, and here's the this was like the second day. This was like the second day of shooting. And I'm just like handing the mixed pre 3 to Ezra, our champion 16-year-old high school resident youngest member of the crew, the whole sound kit. But he did it, and he did it right.
If you could add a character to the Queen's ensemble in Butterfly Junction, who would they be?
Oh, ooh.
Pretty open-ended, so run with it.
Well, this is like, since this is kind of giving me very much DBDBTS, I have to give a deep cut answer, which is I have to respond with a cut character because
Oh.
there was a character who I very much enjoyed and sadly was no longer made to exist. and that was the ninja, who basically functioned as like the scout sentry type, like basically the ninja kind of got folded into the knight guy, because like
Mhm.
they both kind of served the same purpose, which was to like resist the monster but get like unalived by the monster.
Mhm.
And we kind of were like, we really only need to illustrate this one time to
Mhm.
illustrate how, like the monster is not to be trifled with.
Yeah.
And so that kind of instead became that like the driver becomes a victim of the monster after the knight is a victim to the monster, and so that is the 1-2 instead. It was really just the costume for the Rust Ninja. That's what we that the Rust Ninja.
Mm.
That was the name.
Mhm.
It just came to me, the Rust Ninja.
Mhm.
Yeah, the costume was sick.
I remember the Rust Ninja in like the treatment and early versions of the
Mhm.
script. I was like, oh, I guess it's just gone. It didn't work, or got bygone to the edit. But it's cool to know
Mhm.
that you I didn't know that there was footage that existed of that.
Curious as to what lore, if any, you created about a character that you think as sort of canon.
This question is literally, Dimitrios, what are your headcanons? I just have to say it. I
Yeah.
just have to say it out loud.
So this is I have never at any point since I got brought onto the project thought about it this way, but actually, and hopefully you remember this, Despiona, my like my sort of trump card, like fifth suit ace for the score that I talked to you about the day that I was on set is almost I guess it's kind of like my headcanon, which is that the so Butterfly Junction as a place is sort of just a different manifestation and fixture of the queen's mind, Ash's mind, that character's mind. And so my decision to use Despoina's actual voice in the score was sort of this way of representing, like, it doesn't matter where you go, what's happening, like everything you see and experience in Butterfly Junction is in some way like derived from the queen. So even when she's not present, but especially when she is, and when there's other like other characters that are like pieces and aspects of her, she's there. So using Despoina's voice was my way of like, this is how I'm interpreting it.
It's like the suggestion of the queen's power in everything that exists there. So it's like not necessarily full on omnipotence,
Mhm.
but like yeah, like headcanon, queen is nigh and omnipotent with it in the context of her realm. Like yeah, because it's like it gives everything this like she's in the water, she's in the walls, like don't
Yeah.
look in a
Mm.
mirror, she's there, like, type of
Mm.
vibe.
Yeah, I didn't know you used Despoina's voice in the score. That's really cool. I'll have
Next
to
time,
look out for
yeah,
that.
you should it's it's there in at least two or three of the tracks for the
Mm.
soundtrack album.
Mhm.
But it's in more in the score. So next, if you
Oh,
watch
exciting.
it for the watch party, keep an ear out because it's in there. And I baked it
Ooh.
into some places that it's not obvious, but once you realize it's there, it's doing a job. So
Actually, wait. So, like, does anybody like this is not a question on the list. I'm going off script. But like, so like you and I knew about that, right? Like, Cass had no idea. Like, who else on the team do we know had an idea of like that specific aspect of the composition?
I think, I mean, like anybody who overheard our conversation that day on set, my roommate, shout out to my roommate at the time, Onish, helped me on some of the mixing and like
Mm.
production elements when I was mixing the score. He came in and kind of like took a listen. So he knew, and he actually gave me some suggestions as to the stuff I could do to Dee's voice to get it where I wanted it.
Mm.
So, but other people on the team, I don't think so. I think it would have just been the four of us, you and I and Liam and Shauna, until now, presumably. I think the only other like headcanon I have is that the treehouse is a real place in East Fletchburg. Like the treehouse that's in Butterfly Junction has
Mm.
like an equivalent place in East Fletchburg that only Ash knows where it is, and maybe Luca did, but for some reason, because there was like so much like memory and sort of ties to the real world packed into that place, I think that's my only sort of like real headcanon, is that there is something in East Fletchburg that you might go there and never know, but that's like if you flipped the world on its head and entered Butterfly Junction instead, you would be in the treehouse.
No, like that thing is the inflection point. I love that. In the film, we spend a little bit of time in the real world East Fleshburg. But you, Cass, actually grew up in a neighboring town in the real world.
Are you doxing
So
me?
that's what the question says.
Dox yourself.
The question is, did you have a Casey and Robin childhood?
Oh, that's heavy.
Right? Makes you think.
I have a Casey and Robin childhood. I mean, I think you know what is like integral and so baked into this story, and like one of the reasons that I was so drawn to being a part of the project was the fact that it's a small town movie. Like it's a rural movie, not only like in the narrative, but in the way it's approached. And I think there's that through line, like in the movie, where that
Mhm.
rural experience is, I can't watch it and not see, even if I didn't have those specific experiences, even if I wasn't like going to the playground and like spinning on the, the equipment and getting drunk after prom, like there's still that overarching feeling of being in a place that's too small for maybe, your hopes or your dreams or even just your current existence, and it can feel
Mm.
stifling. And there's that constant push and pull, which I've experienced, so much in my life, especially, now living in Los Angeles, moving out of Vermont and feeling the pull back. But, growing
Mm.
up, there is always that um that friction between, what these two characters represent, which is, you know, wanting to stay and wanting to leave. And
Mm.
I feel like when I watch this movie, and when I think about this movie, and when we were making this movie, it was so special to me for that reason, because like I feel like most people, and I think, Liam feels this way too, like in just various conversations we've had, that most of us growing up in, Vermont and small town rural areas, we have both. Like we have the both of these things like within us, and it's just like learning how to balance that, learning how to let go of one of them, learning how to, I think eventually, the hope is that we can have both and we can hold both to be true, and like hold the fact that we love the place we're from and we loved the experiences we had, like growing there and growing up there. Like I certainly do. Like I'm so grateful to have like grown up in that space. But I also at many points, was the Robin. I was like, get me out of here. Like literally, like I want to go, I want to explore. I feel like I'm being stifled. I feel like there's nothing here for me. And I feel
Mm.
like that's such a hallmark, like, of that small town rural experience. Um, so did I have a Casey and Robin childhood? Yes. Yes.